The hatchling opened her eyes into smoke. Not the clean smoke of a hearth or a signal fire, but the chemical kind. The kind that tasted of scorched alloy and superheated stone, and something biological she did not yet have a name for. It coated the inside of her nostrils and settled on her tongue, and her body's first conscious act was to sneeze, a sharp, involuntary convulsion that cracked the remaining shell membrane around her hindquarters and deposited her, wet and blinking, onto a surface that was not warm. Stone, broken stone. The floor beneath her was cracked in a radial pattern, the fractures extending outward from a central impact point 3 meters to her left, where something very large and very heavy had struck the ground with enough force to shatter the foundation slabs. Daylight poured through a hole in the ceiling 2 stories above, not a window, not an opening, but a rupture, the kind of structural failure that happened when a building stopped being a building and became debris with opinions about gravity. She sneezed again. Her wings, new, still folded in the tight accordion of the egg, sticky with albumin, twitched against her flanks. She tried to stand. Her legs did not cooperate. They were too new. The joints bent in directions that surprised her, and the claws at the end of each foot scraped against the broken stone with a sound like chalk on slate, and after 4 attempts she managed something that was not quite standing but was no longer lying down. The room resolved. It had been a hall. She could see the bones of it, the vaulted ceiling ribs, the remains of tiered seating carved from pale sandstone, the shattered remnants of what might have been a speaker's platform at the far end. Daylight and dust filled the upper air in equal measure. The walls that remained standing were scorched but intact, and the scorch patterns told a story she could not yet read, but that her body understood in a way that preceded language. Something terrible had happened here, and whatever had happened was over. She was alone. That fact registered with a weight that her new body was not equipped to carry. The absence of warmth, of breath, of the subsonic vibration that her egg had been bathed in for all the time before this moment, was so total and so sudden that it felt like a sound stopping. Like a hum she had been hearing for her entire existence had simply ceased, and the silence it left was the loudest thing in the room. She opened her mouth and made a sound, not a word, not a cry in any organized sense, the vocalization of a body that had been designed to announce itself to a mother and was announcing itself to rubble instead. High, thin, carrying her throat produced it without instruction. It bounced off the broken walls and came back to her with no answer attached. She tried again, louder. The sound cracked at its peak and dissolved into the dust-filled air, and nothing answered, and nothing moved, and nothing was warm. She began to walk. The floor was an obstacle course of debris, chunks of ceiling stone, twisted metal framing, fragments of furniture she could not identify. Her new legs navigated it poorly. She fell twice in the first 10 meters, catching herself on her wing wrists the way her body seemed to know how without being taught. Her scales were soft, they would harden later, as the keratin cured, but for now they were the texture of wet leather, and every sharp edge on the floor was a threat her body registered but could not avoid. She found the doorway by following the light. The corridor beyond was cracked but navigable, the ceiling intact. The daylight came from the corridor's far end, where something had blown the exterior wall outward and left an opening the size of a cargo door. She walked toward it. Her claws clicked on the stone. The sound was the only company she had. The opening gave onto a courtyard. She stopped at the threshold and stared. The courtyard had been paved in pale stone that was now cratered and blackened in overlapping circles. Debris littered the surface, bent metal structures that might have been vehicles, scattered dark shapes her eyes slid away from because her brain, new as it was, had already decided they were not things she should look at closely. And beyond the courtyard, past a low wall reduced to a line of stumps, the landscape opened into a valley so green and so wide that the contrast with the scorched stone made her eyes ache. Morning light flooded the valley. The sun was above the eastern ridge, and the light turned every blade of grass into a filament of gold and made the river at the valley's center flash white where the current broke over stones. The air was clean, profoundly clean after the chemical smoke of the hall, carrying the scent of wet earth and growing things and the mineral bite of cold water moving fast. Something in her chest, something deeper than lungs, something that lived in the resonance architecture she did not yet know she possessed, vibrated. The sound she made this time was different from the cry in the hall, lower, sustained, a hum that her body produced from the center of her sternum and that she could feel in her forepaws and in the soft plates along her spine and in the thin membrane of her still folded wings. She did not know what it meant. She only knew that the valley was beautiful and that her body wanted to say so, and that this was the only way it knew how. She climbed the low wall, a scramble that required all 4 legs and both wing wrists, and dropped into grass taller than she was. The morning dew soaked her belly. The world was enormous and she was very, very small. She walked into it anyway. The grass made sounds. Not language, she understood already that language was a different thing, that the sounds coming from her own throat were shaped by intent in a way that the grass's sounds were not, but the rustle of blades as she pushed through, the hum of small flying insects that scattered at her approach, the distant percussive rhythm of the river's current against rock, all combined into a texture that her ears processed as information. The world was speaking, even if it was not speaking to her. She listened. She cataloged. She did not know the word cataloging, but the instinct was there, bred into the architecture of her brain. Receive, store, compare. She walked for what might have been 20 minutes or might have been an hour. Her sense of time was as new as everything else, and the concept of duration was still something she was assembling from raw data. The grass thinned near the river. The bank was muddy and her claws sank into it, and the cold water touched her forepaws, and she jerked back with a sound that was pure, undiluted surprise. Cold. The water was cold. She had not known cold was a thing that could happen to you from the outside. The cold she had felt in the hall had been an absence. This cold was active. It reached into her feet and pulled heat out, and her spine plates fanned outward in a display she did not know was a threat response because she did not yet know what a threat was. She stepped back. She regarded the water. It moved. Everything she had encountered so far, the stone, the debris, the walls, the grass, had been still. The water moved. It went somewhere. It came from somewhere. The concept of origin and destination arranged itself in her mind like the first 2 pieces of a puzzle she would spend her life assembling. She followed the river downstream. The valley widened as she walked. The eastern ridge flattened into rolling hills covered in low scrub that smelled sharp and resinous, a scent her nostrils cataloged as plant matter, alive, producing volatile compounds, possibly defensive. The western ridge remained steep, its face exposed rock veined with mineral deposits that caught the climbing sun and threw back light in colors she did not have names for. She would learn the names later. For now they were data points, filed in the expanding library of her first morning. The river curved around a bend and she found the bridge, 3 metal beams laid across the water, a plank surface partially missing, sagging in the middle. But it was a structure, and structures meant builders, and builders meant minds, and minds meant she was not the only thinking thing in this valley. On the far side, a path led up a gentle slope toward a cluster of low buildings that sat against the hillside like animals sheltering from wind. Small, practical, made of timber and local stone with roofs of corrugated metal. Some damaged, a wall collapsed here, a roof peeled back there, but the damage was older than the damage in the hall. Weather damage, age. Except one. The building at the center was intact. Its door was open. Fabric hung from a line strung between 2 posts beside the door, fabric that moved in the morning breeze, which meant it had been hung recently, which meant the concept of recently now included someone who hung fabric on a line. She approached. The path was packed earth, easier on her claws than the rubble of the hall. The morning light was full now, the sun above the eastern ridge, and her shadow, The first time she had noticed, she had a shadow stretch behind her like a second self, elongated and strange, with wing stubs that looked larger in silhouette than they felt on her body. She reached the doorway and stopped. The opening was wide enough for her to pass through. She was no larger than a medium dog, her body still compact with the density of the newly hatched, but something in the air made her hesitate. A scent, complex, layered, organic in a way that the smoke and the stone and the grass had not been. Living, the scent was of something living, something warm-blooded and recently active, whose body produced compounds she did not recognize: sweat and soap, and the exhalation of processed food, and the underlying signature of a metabolism running on rest. Asleep, her body suggested, though she did not know how it knew this. The scent of a sleeping creature was different from the scent of a waking one. She could not explain why. She simply knew. She crossed the threshold. The interior was a single room. Stone floor, timber walls, a window that let in morning light, a table with 2 legs and a makeshift third made of stacked flat stones, a shelf of containers, a metal basin with a hand pump, and in the corner, on a low frame padded with folded fabric, a shape. A person. The hatchling did not know this word. What she knew was that the shape was warm. She could feel the radiated heat from 2 meters away. The shape was breathing slow, rhythmic, the chest rising and falling in a pattern her own body recognized as fundamental. Above the fabric, a face was visible. The skin was a warm brown, lined at the eyes and the corners of the mouth. The hair was dark, cut short, threaded with gray at the temples. The hands were broad, the fingers thick, the knuckles enlarged in a way that suggested hard, sustained manual work. She moved closer. Her claws on the stone floor made a sound she could not suppress, the light ticking of keratin on mineral, and the shape stirred. The hatchling froze. One eye opened, brown, bloodshot at the edges in a way that spoke of insufficient sleep. It focused, it found her. The moment held. She was standing in a bar of morning light. Her scales were the color of deep water at noon, a blue-green that shifted toward teal where the plates overlapped, and in the morning sun they caught the light and threw it back in prismatic fragments that danced on the stone walls. Her eyes were gold. Her wing stubs were edged in a darker shade. She was wet and scraped, and her spine plates were half erect, and she was standing in a stranger's house at dawn, and she had no idea what to do next. The person sat up slowly. The blanket fell to the waist, revealing a torso covered by a faded gray shirt, mended at the shoulder, the collar frayed. The movements were careful, deliberate, the way you move when you do not want to startle something. The hands stayed visible. "Oh," the person said. The word was soft, short. It carried no aggression, no urgency, no command. It was the verbal equivalent of the open hands, a thing offered, not imposed. The hatchling's response was involuntary. The hum from her sternum started again, lower this time, steadier. A sound that said, in whatever language her body spoke before her mind learned words, "I am here. I do not know what to do. Please do not make me leave." The person looked at her for a long time. Then the person did something the hatchling would remember for the rest of her very long life. The person got out of bed, moved to the shelf, took down a container, opened it, and poured something into a shallow bowl. Then the person set the bowl on the floor, midway between them, and sat down cross-legged on the stone with their back against the wall, and waited. The bowl contained liquid. The hatchling's nostrils analyzed it. Water, dissolved minerals, a faint organic compound she would later learn was powdered milk. It was warm. The person had stored it in an insulated container, prepared the night before. She crossed the distance. The milk was extraordinary. She had never tasted anything she had never tasted, and the sensation of warm liquid entering her mouth and spreading heat through her chest was so overwhelming that her spine plates flattened entirely and her wing stubs relaxed, and a sound came from her that was neither a hum nor a cry but something between. a vocalization of such uncomplicated pleasure that the person on the floor made a sound in response, a short exhalation, almost a laugh, quickly suppressed. She drank, the person watched. The morning light moved across the floor between them, and the dust motes turned to gold, and the world outside the window was green and enormous, and the room was small and warm. And for the first time since she had opened her eyes into smoke, the silence had a shape she could rest inside. When the bowl was empty, she looked up, milk on her jaw, gold eyes fixed on the person with an intensity that was not fear and not trust, but the precursor to both the raw, unfiltered attention of a mind encountering another mind for the first time. The person extended one hand, palm up, fingers relaxed, resting on the stone at the edge of the bowl. She touched her nose to the palm. The skin was warm and rough, and it smelled of soap and earth, and beneath all of that, something her nostrils identified and her brain filed without a label. She would learn the label later. Cortisol, the stress chemical, the scent of a body carrying more than it showed. The person's fingers did not close. They stayed open. The hand stayed still, and the hatchling pressed her nose harder into the palm and felt the warmth transfer from skin to scale, and the hum that came from her chest was the deepest sound her new body had yet produced. "All right," the person said quietly. "All right then." The hatchling did not move. The person did not move. And the room held them both in the warm amber of a morning that was nobody's plan and everybody's answer. And outside the window the valley glowed green and gold, and the river caught the sun, and the world was still enormous, but the part of it that mattered had shrunk to the size of an open hand. The person's name was Maeve Asar. The hatchling learned it over the course of the morning, in fragments, the way she learned everything, by listening, watching, cataloging the sounds and gestures and routines that made up the shape of a life. Maeve was a woman of perhaps 60 years. Her hands were the most informative part of her broad-palmed, with calluses on the fingers and thumbs that mapped a specific history of labor. The right hand had a scar across the back, a clean line from the base of the index finger to the wrist. The left hand's ring finger was slightly crooked, broken once and set imperfectly. Maeve talked while she worked, and the work was constant. Sweeping the floor, pumping water into the basin, heating a kettle on a small gas burner, checking the fabric on the line outside. Sheets ought to be dry by noon if the wind holds. The pump's sticking again, there's grit in the valve. The kettle's slow today, everything's slow today. She was not talking to the hatchling. She was talking to the habit of speech that fills a space when the space has been empty too long. But the hatchling listened with her entire body, and each word added a layer to the model she was building. The house was one of 12 in the cluster. The others were empty. Some had been empty for a long time, doors swollen shut, roofs compromised, interiors reclaimed by insects and small animals. Maeve's house was the only one showing sustained habitation, the swept floor, the mended shirt, the orderly shelf. One person, living alone, maintaining a settlement built for a dozen families. "Used to be staff quarters," Maeve said. "For the compound up the hill. Housekeeping, maintenance, kitchen. I did the linens. 22 years of linens. Bedding, table settings, curtains, ceremonial drapes for the assembly hall. Washed them, pressed them, mended them when they tore." Which they did constantly, because dragons are not gentle on fabric. She said the word dragons with a tone the hatchling's ears registered as complex. Not hostile, not reverential. Something closer to the way Maeve said kettle or pump, a thing that was part of her life, not above it. The compound was a diplomatic station, joint operation. Dragons ran the governance side, humans ran the support side. 300 dragons, 80 human staff. We kept the place running. They kept the treaties running, worked fine for decades. She paused. The wrench turned. A corroded valve component came free with a gritty pop. Then it didn't. The hatchling was sitting on the stone floor near the table, her body arranged in a compact curl, legs tucked, tail wrapped, wing stubs flat. She was watching Maeve's hands. The way the fingers worked the corroded metal, the way the wrench turned with precise rotation that wasted no motion. "The fight wasn't ours," Maeve said. "Human staff doesn't get a vote in dragon politics. We knew something was coming. You can't wash the linens of 300 dragons for 2 decades without learning to read the tension in a room. The tablecloths change. The ceremonial drapes come down for different reasons. The bedding tells you who slept and who didn't. I could read the compound's mood from the laundry cart." She reassembled the pump valve, tested it. Water flowed clear. She filled the basin and splashed her face and dried it on a cloth that was clean but worn thin enough to show light through the weave. "When the assault came, most of us got out. The compound took the hit. That hall up the hill, that was the assembly chamber. They hit it first." She looked at the hatchling. Morning light caught them both. "You were in there, in the egg chamber behind the assembly hall, the nursery. I used to change the incubation linens every 3rd day. Dragon eggs need a specific humidity. 22 years of changing incubation linens, and I never once saw an egg survive an impact like that." The hatchling did not understand all of these words, but she understood the tone and the direction of Maeve's gaze, which moved from the hatchling to the window to the scorched profile of the compound on the hill and back. "You shouldn't be alive," Maeve said. "That hall collapsed 2 months ago." There were 9 eggs in the nursery. The diplomatic staff retrieved 7. Broken. They couldn't find the other 2. They assumed the debris had. She stopped. Her hand went to her face, pressed the heel against one eye, held it there. 2 months, Maeve said. "You were under the rubble for 2 months, in the egg, alive." The hatchling hummed. Maeve's hand was trembling, the cortisol had spiked, and beneath it saline tears. "Well," Maeve said at last, "you're here now." She took down a second container. This one held a paste, thick, grainy, smelling of rendered fat and ground grain. She scooped a portion into the bowl. "I've been feeding the local ferrets. It's not dragon food. I don't know what dragon food is. But it's protein and fat in your skin and bones under those scales, so eat." The hatchling ate. The paste was dense and rich, and it coated the inside of her mouth with a flavor she would later describe as the taste of being cared for by someone who was not sure what you needed, but was determined to offer what they had. Over the days that followed, the hatchling investigated everything. It was not a choice. It was architecture, the structure of her mind. She was built to catalog, receive, store, compare. Every new input was filed and cross-referenced against every previous input, and from the growing web of comparisons, understanding emerged. She investigated the house. The stone walls were local sandstone. She could see the tool marks where the blocks had been cut. The corrugated metal roof expanded in the morning sun and contracted in the evening, producing pops and ticks she initially cataloged as threat sounds and later reclassified as building behavior after sufficient repetitions, demonstrated a temperature-correlated pattern. She investigated the other buildings. She spent an entire morning exploring the house closest to Maeve's. Its door was swollen shut, but a gap in the rear wall admitted her compact body. Inside, she found the artifacts of departure: a chair overturned, a shelf emptied in haste, a single boot standing upright in the corner as if its owner had been called away mid-step. The dust was thick. Nobody had been here in a long time. She investigated the compound. This took courage she did not know she had until she found it. The path from the settlement wound uphill through scrub grass and exposed rock, and the compound's perimeter wall was breached in 6 places. She entered through the widest breach and found herself in the courtyard she had crossed on her first morning, and the dark shapes she had avoided looking at were still there, and this time she looked. Vehicle wreckage, transport craft struck from the air. The people inside them, she looked away. The instinct was not fear. It was something more precise, a recognition that some data points, once filed, could not be unfiled, and that her catalog was too new to hold this kind of information without being damaged by it. She returned to the assembly hall. The nursery, Maeve had said, was behind it. She found the passage a reinforced corridor, its walls thicker than any others, its ceiling vaulted with sandstone arches but lower, more protective. The nursery was smaller than she had expected. 12 recessed alcoves lined the walls, each shaped to hold an egg, each lined with fabric the incubation linens Maeve had mentioned. Most alcoves were empty, their fabric shredded by debris. 2 were crushed entirely. She found the alcove she had been born in. She knew it by the shell fragments, pieces of her own egg, scattered in a pattern that reconstructed the shape of the container that had held her for 2 months in the dark. She sat in the alcove. The linen beneath her was Maeve's work, 22 years of fiber and weave. She hummed. The sound filled the nursery and bounced off the reinforced walls and came back layered with harmonics that her sternum's resonance architecture processed as data. The walls had been shaped to reflect sound in specific patterns, intentionally, the way a musical instrument's body is shaped to amplify and direct vibration. The nursery was a resonance chamber, and her hum, bouncing off its walls, returned carrying frequencies she had not produced. Other voices, other hums, traces of the dragons who had stood in this room and sung to the eggs and whose resonance signatures were still embedded in the stone. She pressed her belly to the linen and listened, and the voices of the dead sang to her from the walls, and she did not understand what they were saying, but she understood that they were saying something and that it mattered, and that she was the only one here to receive it. She went back the next morning, and the next. Maeve noticed. "You're going up to the compound every day," she said. She was mending a shirt, the same gray one, the same shoulder seam. Her needle moved through the fabric with a precision the hatchling recognized as the product of 10,000 repetitions. "I can see you on the path from the kitchen window." The hatchling was lying on the floor near the table. She had grown in the 12 days since hatching. Her legs were longer. Her wing stubs had begun to unfurl into recognizable wings, and her scales had hardened from wet leather to something closer to ceramic, the blue-green darkening toward a deeper teal that Maeve described as the color of the deep end of the river at midday. She looked at Maeve. She could not yet speak in a way that Maeve understood, but she had learned to communicate intent through posture and gaze. 22 years of reading dragon body language through laundry gave Maeve no difficulty interpreting. "The nursery," Maeve said. The needle paused. "You're going to the nursery." The hatchling's spine plates rippled, not a threat display anymore. She had learned to modulate the ripple into emphasis, the way humans used eyebrows. This ripple said yes. "You're listening to the walls," Maeve said. It was not a question. The needle sat motionless in her fingers. "The walls in that nursery, they were built to carry sound. I always knew that. When I changed the linens, I could hear the acolytes singing from 2 corridors away. The acoustic engineers designed it so the eggs would be bathed in frequency. I didn't understand the science. I understood the fabric which weaves dampened the wrong frequencies, which ones let the right ones through." She set the mending down. "I'll come with you tomorrow. I haven't been up there since after. I should check the linens." They went up together the next morning. Maeve walked slowly on the hill path, her left hip moved stiffly, and the hatchling, walking beside her, adjusted her own pace to match without thinking about it, the way water adjusts to the shape of its container. The morning was clear. The valley below was green and gold, and the river flashed white, and the scrub on the western ridge smelled of resin. And the world was so beautiful that the hatchling's hum started up involuntarily, and Maeve glanced down at her. And the corner of Maeve's mouth moved in a way the hatchling had learned to catalog as almost smiling. The compound was as they had left it. Maeve walked through the courtyard without looking at the wreckage, her gaze fixed forward, her jaw set in the expression the hatchling associated with the cortisol spike, the stress chemical, the one that meant a body was carrying something it did not want to show. They entered the assembly hall. Maeve stopped. She stood in the center of the broken floor and looked up at the ruptured ceiling, and her breathing changed. 300 dragons sat in this room, Maeve said. I served it for 22 years. Set the table linens for every formal session, pressed the ceremonial drapes, swept the floor after every meeting, scale particulate, shed skin, the grit they tracked in from the courtyard. I swept it every evening, and every morning it was dusty again, and I swept it again, and that was my job, and I was good at it. She looked at the hatchling. I was here when it happened, in the linen closet behind the assembly hall, 2 rooms from the nursery, sorting the incubation wraps. The first impact hit the roof. The second hit the courtyard. The third hit the north wall, and the ceiling came down, and I ran. I should not have run because the eggs were in the nursery, and I was the nearest person to them, and I ran. Her voice cracked on the last word. Not broke, cracked, the way stone cracks along a line of existing stress. The hatchling moved. She crossed the distance and pressed her head against Maeve's shin, and the hum from her sternum rose into the broken hall and bounced off the walls and came back carrying the ghostly frequencies she had found in the nursery, the embedded voices of the dragons who had used this room, stirred now by a hatchling's instinctive song. Maeve's hand came to rest on the hatchling's head gently, the way she laid fabric on the line, with the unconscious precision of someone who had spent a lifetime handling things more delicate than themselves. I came back the next day, Maeve said. After the evacuation team left, after everyone pulled out, I went into the nursery and counted the alcoves. 7 eggs gone, retrieved, 2 alcoves crushed. I sat on the nursery floor and I checked the linens. Her hand on the hatchling's head was steady. The cortisol was there, but beneath it, oxytocin had risen. Trust. The linens in your alcove were intact. I had changed them 2 days before the attack, double-layered because the humidity had been running high and I wanted extra absorption. And I thought those linens are still good. If there's an egg under that debris, those linens are still doing their job. She swallowed. I checked every day. I couldn't move the debris, the support beam was too heavy, and I'm 60 with a bad hip and a mending needle, not a rescue crew. But I put my hand on the rubble and felt for heat, because dragon eggs are warm. For 42 days I felt nothing. On the 43rd day, I felt warmth, and I sat down and put both hands flat on the rubble, and stayed there for an hour because the warmth meant the egg was alive, and the egg being alive meant I had not left it to die. The hatchling hummed. The hall's acoustic architecture, even broken, carried the sound upward through the ruptured ceiling and into the morning air, and the valley heard it, and the compound's scorched walls heard it, and somewhere in the sandstone, the voices of 300 dragons stirred. I couldn't get you out, but I could keep the temperature stable. I moved a warming unit from the linen closet, the one we used for pressing ceremonial drapes, and positioned it against the rubble above your alcove. I ran a power line from the settlement's generator. I set it to 38.4 degrees, the incubation temperature I'd maintained for 22 years. I knew the number by heart. I'd written it on a card and taped it to the linen closet wall on my first day, and it was still there after the ceiling fell. She paused. Her hand found the hatchling's head again, the spot between the horn buds where the plates had not yet fully sealed. Every morning for 2 months, she said. Before the sun came up, I walked up the hill and checked the warming unit and put my hand on the rubble and waited. Some mornings I stayed an hour. Some mornings I stayed until the generator needed fuel. The settlement's solar array kept it running during the day, but the nights were cold, and the fuel cells drained faster than they should have, and twice I had to walk to the relay station, 6 kilometers down the valley road, to haul back a replacement cell, because the temperature could not drop below 37.8 or the egg's membrane would begin to dehydrate, and everything I had done would mean nothing. She knelt. The motion was stiff, her bad hip protesting, and she came down to the hatchling's eye level on the broken floor with the morning light pouring through the ruptured ceiling. I set out the milk before I went asleep. In case you came. The ferret paced too. I didn't know which one you'd need. I didn't know if you'd come at all. But I set them out and left the door open and went to sleep and woke up, and you were standing in my kitchen with the sun on your scales, and I thought, there she is, the one that made it. The hatchling pressed her forehead against Maeve's knee, and the hum in her sternum deepened, until it was not a sound any more but a vibration that moved through both their bodies, through the stone floor, through the foundation of the broken hall, and into the bedrock of the valley where the dead waited and the river ran, and the world was larger than either of them, and exactly the right size for both. The investigation of the nursery became their shared project. Every morning they walked up the hill together. Maeve brought tools: the wrench, a pry bar, a small battery-powered lantern that she hung from the nursery's remaining ceiling hook to supplement the daylight that filtered through the corridor. The hatchling brought herself, which was, as they both discovered, the more important contribution. The hatchling's hum activated the nursery's acoustic properties in ways tools could not. When she pressed her belly to the linen in her berth alcove and hummed, the walls returned frequencies carrying embedded information, the resonant signatures of the dragons who attended the eggs, the subsonic lullabies sung to the clutch, the deep vibrational record of every hatchling that had ever opened its eyes in this room. She received these frequencies through her sternum and her spine plates and her developing resonance chambers, and she did not understand them yet, but she stored them, and the archive grew. Maeve worked beside her. She cleared debris from the crushed alcoves carefully, methodically, the way she had cleared every other mess in 22 years. She sorted rubble by material, sandstone to one pile, metal framing to another, shattered incubation equipment to a third. When she found fragments of eggshell, she set them aside in a small container and labeled it with the alcove number and the date, because that was what you did when the evidence mattered and nobody else was there to collect it. On the fourth morning of their joint investigation, the hatchling found the second egg. She was humming in the corridor between the nursery and the assembly hall when the resonance return changed. A new frequency not embedded in the walls, not a ghost, not a memory. A live signal, faint, rhythmic, the vibrational signature of a living body enclosed in a calcified shell. Her spine plates fanned to full extension. She pressed her forepaws against the corridor floor and pushed the hum harder, searching for the source. The signal was coming from beneath the floor, from a gap in the rubble where the nursery's subfloor drainage system had created a pocket of air and stability. She began to dig. Her claws, now hardened to proper keratin, scored the stone with a desperate efficiency that would have alarmed any observer who did not understand what she had found. The stone resisted. She dug harder. The corridor floor was thick foundation-grade construction, built to withstand exactly this kind of catastrophic load, and her claws were new and her body was small and the egg was down there, alive, pulsing, and she could not reach it. Maeve arrived 30 seconds later. She took one look at the hatchling's posture, the fan plates, the frantic digging, the specific orientation toward a point on the floor, and understood. She did not ask questions. She picked up the pry bar. It took them 2 hours. Maeve levered up a foundation slab while the hatchling dug beneath it, and then Maeve repositioned and levered again, and the hatchling dug deeper, and the morning light climbed through the corridor, and the dust rose and Maeve's bad hip screamed and the hatchling's claws dulled, and the egg's signal grew stronger with every centimeter of stone removed. They reached it at mid-morning. The egg was wedged in a drainage channel beneath the nursery's subfloor, cushioned by shredded incubation linen, Maeve's linen, her weave, her 22 years that had fallen through the broken floor, and formed a nest of fabric in the drainage channel that had kept the egg from rolling into the pipe system and being lost. Maeve lifted it out. The shell was intact but thin, almost translucent, and through the calcified membrane the hatchling could see movement. A shape, curled tight, pressing against the shell's inner surface. "It's warm," Maeve said. Her voice was not steady. Her hands were. She held the egg the way she held fabric, supporting the weight without gripping, cradling the curve without pressure. It's warm and it's moving, and it's been down there for 2 months, and the linens kept it alive. The hatchling pressed her nose against the egg's surface. The resonance from her sternum passed through the shell, and the shape inside responded: a pulse, a flutter, a subsonic vibration that the hatchling's chambers received and translated and filed as the most important data point in her short life. The second egg was alive, and her hum had found it. Maeve carried the egg down the hill. She walked slowly, cradling it against her chest, and the hatchling walked beside her and matched her pace, and the morning sun was warm on both of them, and the valley was green below, and the compound's scorched walls watched them descend like sentinels standing down. In the house, Maeve built an incubator. She used the warming unit from the compound, wrapped the egg in the best linen she had, the double-layered weave she had been saving, and set the temperature to 38.4 degrees, and sat beside it on the stone floor with her back against the wall and her hands finally still. The hatchling lay beside the incubator and hummed. The sound filled the small house, and the egg pulsed in response, and the second heartbeat joined the first, and Maeve closed her eyes and breathed. 3 days later, the dragons came. The hatchling heard them before Maeve did, a deep, percussive resonance in the air, lower than the wind, a vibration that her sternum recognized, and her spine plates answered by rising to full extension. She ran to the doorway. The sky above the eastern ridge was occupied. 4 shapes, enormous, their wingspans wider than the compound's courtyard, their scales catching the morning sun in flashes of amber and bronze and deep, burnished gold. They came in formation, a diamond pattern, tight, disciplined. The hatchling had never seen an adult dragon. She had heard them in the nursery walls, their resonant signatures, their embedded songs. She had imagined shapes to match the sounds. She had been wrong. The reality was so far beyond her imagination that her catalog mind, for the first and only time, simply stopped processing and stared. They were beautiful. They were terrifying. They were the largest living things she had ever seen, and their eyes burned with an intelligence that made her own considerable intellect feel like a single candle in a cathedral. Maeve came to the doorway. She was drying her hands on a cloth she had been washing the egg's linen wrappings, maintaining the humidity cycle even now, even with 4 dragons dropping out of the sky, and her face held the expression the hatchling had learned to read as composed assessment. Not calm, not unconcerned, composed, the deliberate arrangement of a face that chose not to show what it felt. "That's a conclave formation," Maeve said. Her voice was even. "Diplomatic wing, 4 means a senior delegation." The dragons landed in the meadow between the settlement and the river. The ground shook. The hatchling felt it through her forepaws, and her catalog mind filed the data: mass, impact, distribution, and even in the midst of her awe she could not stop collecting. The lead dragon was gold. Not the yellow gold of the morning sun, but a deeper shade, burnished, the color of old metal polished by centuries of air and light. The scales were massive, each one the size of the hatchling's entire body. The eyes were amber, slitted, and they found the hatchling in the doorway the way a searchlight finds a ship. The hatchling's hum died. For the first time since she had opened her eyes into smoke, her sternum was silent. The gold dragon lowered its head. The motion brought the enormous skull to a height level with the roof of Maeve's house. The amber eyes examined the hatchling with an attention so total that she felt it as a physical pressure, a weight on her scales, a vibration in her resonance chambers that was not her own. Then the dragon spoke, not in the subsonic register. In language, words. "Vesore," the dragon said. The hatchling did not know the words, but her body did. Something in the resonance architecture of her sternum responded to the specific harmonic pattern of those syllables, and the response was inherited, encoded in the neural substrate that her egg had built during 2 months of darkness. The words meant last daughter. The gold dragon's gaze moved from the hatchling to Maeve. The amber eyes took in the mending needle in the pocket of the faded gray shirt, the calloused hands, the bad hip, the cloth over the shoulder, the doorway of the small stone house with its incubator humming in the corner. "You are the linen keeper," the gold dragon said. Maeve did not flinch, she did not bow. She stood in her doorway with her hands at her sides and her chin level and said, "I am." We received her resonance signal 3 days ago. The frequency she has been producing in the nursery activated a relay embedded in the compound's communication array. A living hatchling, broadcasting from a nursery we believed destroyed. "It mostly is destroyed," Maeve said, "but the acoustic architecture is intact. The walls still hold resonance. She found that on her own. I just carried the pry bar." The gold dragon was silent. The 3 other dragons, 2 bronze, one a deep copper red whose scales bore the marks of considerable age, had arranged themselves behind the leader in a semicircle that framed the settlement against the hillside. Their eyes were all on Maeve. "The egg record lists 9, the gold dragon said. 7 retrieved, 2 classified as lost. 1 hatched under the rubble," Maeve said. "She's right here. The other one is inside, in an incubator I built from the compound's warming unit and my own linens. It's alive. It's warm. The shell is thin and the heartbeat is strong, and if you want to see it, I'll ask you to lower your voice because loud frequencies disturb the humidity cycle, and I've been maintaining that cycle for 2 months, and I will not have it disrupted now." The copper-red dragon in the rear made a sound. The hatchling's ears caught it and her catalog mind filed it, a rapid clicking of jaw plates. She did not know any dragon except herself and the one inside the egg, but the sound was warm. She filed it as warm. The gold dragon lowered its head further. The skull was now at Maeve's eye level, and the amber eyes and the brown eyes met, and the hatchling standing between them, small and teal and covered in the dust of the nursery, her horn buds barely visible, her wings half unfurled. Her spine plates rippling, watched both faces and understood, with the clarity of a mind built to recognize patterns, that something was happening that was larger than milk or blankets or pry bars or incubation linens. "The Conclave sent us to retrieve the hatchling," the gold dragon said. "The egg, if viable, will be transferred to the central nursery at Tessarn. Both will be registered, named, and assigned to a brooding line. That is the protocol." "I know the protocol," Maeve said. "I've filed the linens for every brooding assignment in this compound for 22 years. Then you know that human staff do not participate in the brooding process. I know that human staff maintain the conditions that make the brooding process possible. I know the humidity in that incubator is set to the exact temperature I maintained for 2 decades. I know that this hatchling walked out of the rubble and into my house, and drank the milk I set out and pressed her nose into my hand. I know she goes up to the nursery every morning and hums into the walls and the walls answer her, and she found the second egg because she was listening and nobody else was." She paused, her hands were still at her sides, they were not trembling. "I also know," she said, "that she chose to come to me. Not to the compound, not to the wreckage, to me. She crossed the courtyard and the field and the river, and she came to the one house in this valley that had a light on, and she stood in my kitchen and she hummed, and I have been around dragons long enough to know what a hatchling's hum means when it is directed at a specific person." The gold dragon did not respond immediately. The amber eyes moved to the hatchling, who was pressed against Maeve's shin, her head against the woman's knee, her sternum producing the deep, steady hum that meant safety and warmth and the presence of someone whose hands smelled of soap and linen, and the compound that meant trust. "Ves Sarai," the gold dragon said again, and this time the words were not addressed to the hatchling. They were addressed to Maeve. "Last daughter." The name carries a designation. In the old tradition, the dragon who answers a last daughter's first call becomes the child's voice in the conclave, the one who speaks for her until she can speak for herself. Maeve's composure held. It held the way the nursery walls held resonance through architecture, not through strength, through the careful arrangement of a life built to withstand exactly this kind of pressure. "I'm not a dragon," she said. "No," the gold dragon said. "You are a woman who changed the incubation linens every third day for 22 years, and who ran when the ceiling fell, and who came back the next day and every day after that, and who kept an egg alive with a warming unit, and a linen she had woven herself, and who opened her door to a hatchling she did not expect, and who fed her and walked beside her, and carried a pry bar up a hill to dig a second egg out of a drainage channel, because a 2-week-old dragon told her it was there." The copper-red dragon made the clicking sound again. The 2 bronze dragons lowered their heads slowly, the way Maeve lowered fabric onto the line, with a deliberation that meant the gesture was not casual. "The protocol," the gold dragon said, "will be amended." The words settled into the morning air. Amended. The hatchling filed it without understanding it. She would understand later that protocols governed everything in the Conclave's world, that they had governed the nursery and the brooding lines and the incubation schedules and the linen change cycles for longer than Maeve had been alive, and that amending one required the agreement of beings who had been writing them for centuries. She would understand that what the gold dragon had just said, in the quiet and factual tone of a statement that had already been decided, was the equivalent of rewriting a law because a woman with a mending needle and a bad hip had done what 300 dragons worth of protocol had not: kept the last 2 eggs of a dead clutch alive. But she did not understand any of that yet. She was 14 days old and her vocabulary was still under construction. But she understood the way Maeve's hand came down to rest on her head, between the horn buds, with the same gentle precision that laid linen on a line. And she understood the way the gold dragon's head lowered further, until the amber eyes were level with hers, and the look in those eyes was not assessment any more but recognition. And she understood the hum, the one that came not from her sternum but from the gold dragon's, a deep, vast, subsonic vibration that moved through the ground and up through her claws and into her resonance chambers, and carried a harmonic she had heard before, in the nursery walls, in the embedded voices of the dead, in the acoustic architecture of a room built to welcome new life into an ancient pattern. The harmonic meant, "You are known, you are named, you are not alone." The hatchling pressed her head harder into Maeve's palm and hummed back, and the valley heard it, and the nursery on the hill heard it, and the egg in the incubator heard it and pulsed, and the morning sun was bright on all of them, the 4 enormous dragons in the meadow, the old woman in the doorway, the small blue-green hatchling with dust on her scales and milk on her memory, and a catalogue of wonders that would grow, over years, into the most complete record of cross-species kindness ever assembled. But that was later. That was the long story, the one that filled archives and amended protocols, and changed the way a civilization thought about the hands that maintained the fabric of its world. For now, there was only this: a morning in a valley, and a woman who had not left, and a hatchling who had found her, and a name that meant last daughter spoken in a voice that meant she would not be last in anything that mattered. The gold dragon straightened. The delegation would stay 11 days, long enough to verify the second egg, assess the nursery's acoustic architecture, file the amended protocol that would, for the first time in the Conclave's history, designate a human as a hatchling's formal voice. But the hatchling did not know any of that yet. She knew only that the morning was warm and the milk had been good, and the woman's hand was on her head, and the valley was enormous, and she was very small, and the world was full of things she had not yet catalogued, and every single one of them was worth investigating. She lifted her nose to the wind, she breathed in, she filed. And somewhere deep in the stone of the nursery on the hill, in walls that held the voices of the dead and the hum of the living and the resonance of every egg that had ever opened in that room, a new frequency settled into the archive. Small, clear, bright with the particular harmonic of a mind encountering the world for the first time and deciding, without reservation, that it was good. The stone received it, the stone held it. The stone would hold it for 1,000 years, long after the hatchling's scales darkened and her wings spread wide, and her resonance chambers deepened into the vast, complex instrument of an elder dragon's mind. But the first note, the one the stone remembered best, the one that future readers would find at the shallowest layer and recognize immediately, was not a word or a name or a declaration. It was the sound of warm milk on a new tongue, and an open hand, and a small body pressing close to someone who smelled of soap and linen, and the quiet, unsentimental devotion of a woman who had spent her life making sure the fabric held.